Hi, I'm Pam Collins. I'm Director of Gardens at the Veterans Memorial Rose Garden at Mississippi State University. And today I want to talk to you about pruning hybrid tea roses in the early spring. This is a very common process that people prune roses this time of the year. We want to decide when we want to do this and why we're doing it. If the plant is in a location that is out in the open and with no conflicts at all, we may not need to prune a rose at all. But if the plant is in a location where we need to control the size of the plant, then we need to be able to reduce that plant appropriately. We also want to consider why we prune these roses in terms of the style of the garden. If a plant is in a landscape setting and it's very casual in its design, we may not want to prune that plant very much at all. But in this garden where the design is very formal, then it's very appropriate to prune these roses in a formal style. And then finally, we want to look at the rose in terms of its health, and we want to be able to remove any plants that are dead or diseased or have crossing limbs or have conflicts with the sidewalk in the location. So we want the plant to be safe for our visitors as they come to the garden. There are several tools you need to prune roses. You may use a small handsaw for large items, to a lopper, to some specialty smaller lopper, to hand pruners. You always want to use sturdy gloves for roses because they do have thorns, and you want a source of sanitation, whether that's 10% bleach solution or sanitary wipes. When we decide to prune a rose, we need to consider the purpose for which the rose is being grown. Are we using this rose as a landscape shrub rose out in an informal garden setting, or are we using this rose for cutting purposes where we want to bring flowers into a home or a business? Then they prune different ways. In this case here in the garden, we're trying to reach a good balance, and that balance is to provide a good garden plant, a good garden-sized plant with blooms that are at eye level for our guests and that maintain the original form of the plant. Mid-February to mid-March is an excellent time to spring prune roses, and the reason we do that is because they are normally dormant at this time, but we're past the worst of the winter weather. This year you can see that spring arrived early for us, but normally these plants would not have leaves on them at this time. We still can go ahead and prune. There are several points to consider when pruning a hybrid tea. The first thing to consider are any dead or diseased wood that's in the plant. In this case, here's an example of a limb that has died back, and here is an example of a canker that needs to be removed. These canes are rather large, and so I'm going to use the loppers to cut them out. After we've removed all of the dead and diseased wood, we need to consider any crossing limbs that need to be pruned out. In this case, you can see where they have been rubbing against each other. I'm going to prune to a bud that faces outward. Now that we've removed the crossing limb, we want to look at the canes that remain, and we're going to reduce the height and width of the plant and retain the original form of the shrub. In the process, we're going to improve the air circulation both within and around the plant. So I'm going to start pruning at this point. This limb is going to be reduced significantly as it's a smaller limb. And I'm going to reduce this limb to shorten it and still retain the form of the plant. As I choose these cuts, I'm looking for buds that face outward in the plant so that when the new growth comes on, we'll have a nice form of the plant. Particularly when you have limbs that are close together, you may want to be sure that they are staggered and that they point to different areas so that they will be spread out when new growth occurs. As you can see, we're removing a significant amount of the plant. That's all right. And roses really are very forgiving. Now we can see the pruned plant. We have, with a very few cuts, we have significantly reduced the size, both the height and the width of the plant. It fits in its setting now, and it will soon start to grow new growth from the buds that are already starting to expand and form healthy new growth for the spring season. Let's put the spring pruning process into perspective. Here's a plant that has not been pruned yet. Here's the plant we just finished pruning. Don't be afraid to make some pretty serious cuts at this point in the season. I'm Pam Collins with Gardening Through the Seasons.